We had over 75 infrastructure projects that were shut down at level 4, and working with our partners to put that in place, and then return to work under level 3 and 2 has been a significant partnershiping exercise. We also had renewals work being done on the road. Some of that kept going, particularly the resilience work, but that again is ramping up again, as well as managing the roads with different volumes on them. And of course, public transport continued to operate throughout the period. And we also looked at delaying WAFs and COFs, so your warrants of fitnesses and certificates of fitness and other things on the roads over the COVID-19 period to support New Zealand over that period. So significant impacts on the organisation, and of course all of our people working from home as well, which had another dimension.
And looking on from here, looking to sort of the long term or coming out the other side of this, do you think it's going to impact on your day-to-day operations?
I guess there's an internal perspective. Running Waka Kotahi, we're an organisation of 2,000 people, and all of those people have worked quite successfully from home. We very dramatically moved to have remote working using video conferencing and other capabilities. We also did the same thing with third parties. So we have actually done community engagement through lockdown using online technology. So absolutely, we've engaged in completely different ways through COVID-19, and we will take the benefits of that, and that's flexible working, being able to collaborate in different and new ways forward with us. The other big thing for us out of COVID-19 is that it's encouraged and activated government to work quite differently and collaborate much more effectively, both within government, but also across public and private sectors. And I think NZTA or Waka Kotahi was already doing that. It was already part of the way we worked, but that has been accelerated through COVID-19. And we know for sure that none of us can do these things alone, manage complex problems, manage the complexities of a transport system, even in normal times, is complex. The overlay of doing that in a COVID-19 environment and needing to make many, many decisions very fast, dynamically, required us to be highly collaborative, to work very extensively with others, and to do it in real time. We will continue to use those strengths into the future, yeah, for sure.
So you're relatively new to the construction sector. In the time that you've been in the role, what are some of the key observations that you have made?
New to the construction sector, and I'm sort of not, because I've worked extensively with the construction sector throughout my career. So my observations coming in to the sector, and already my observations having worked with the sector quite extensively in the past, is it's a very fragmented sector. Historically has been very competitive at every level in terms of how it behaves. What's been really interesting about the construction accord is, for the first time, I think we've seen the sector come together, clients, vertical, horizontal, residential, commercial, to work constructively to solve industry problems that benefit everybody across what is an actual integrated supply chain. And whilst people might be operating on different parts of the construction, vertical, horizontal, they might be in the design part or what have you, actually we're all linked together, because in the optimum model for the construction sector, you would have your horizontal infrastructure working very closely with your vertical infrastructure, your clients, etc., to produce integrated solutions for New Zealand. So we wouldn't be building a new housing development without also having thought about the water, without also having thought about the fibre, without also having thought about what public transport we need off the back of that. So I think it is a fragmented sector that it could accelerate and use the opportunity of what we've seen happen in the construction accord to really future-proof New Zealand in a much new and different way.
And as we are now able to move around our country a little bit more, I guess having those really good connections throughout the country is going to become incredibly important, especially as we all try and get out there and support domestic tourism.
And I think that's a really key point, because often people think Waka Kotahi builds roads or does, transport. What we are is we're a connector. That is our primary role. We connect New Zealand to support a thriving New Zealand. That is our sole purpose, I guess, out of COVID-19, is to continue to accelerate and improve the connections across New Zealand into the future. I think COVID-19 has highlighted some of those areas as being really important. So walking, cycling, and alternate transport modes like scooters, electric vehicles, electric cycles are all becoming really good and really important alternate transport modes. So I think we've been very conscious of that and been working very actively to change our organisation and more broadly the investment within the transport system towards those alternatives. COVID-19 has really accelerated us needing to put quite a bit more money into those areas that support local communities moving forward.
And I guess those connections that you talk about are going to become really important as we move into sort of the rebuild of our economy.
Absolutely. It's at the heart of not only New Zealand's success domestically, but internationally. We still have large amounts of product being exported out of New Zealand, out of our ports and operations. They all need to get to the ports to get exported. We are an absolute enabler to both our foreign export, our domestic imports, and to our connections locally in our economy locally. So we're at the heart of a thriving, successful New Zealand. And then when you go to a local community level, we're at the heart of making it easy for you to get from A to B, to meet your grandmother or to send your kids to school or to safely get the dog to the vet. We're behind all of those things in multiple ways. Your courier company delivering the additional partner parcels under COVID-19. So we are at the heart of a successful, sustainable, green New Zealand into the future.
Well, you're a mind reader because that was the topic I wanted to go on to was sustainability. How important is it that you have this sort of sustainability lens over all these big long-term decisions that you're making?
Oh, it's really important. I'll just give you my context of sustainability. And the Construction Accord has a view of what sustainability means. There's an international standards around what sustainability means. And broadly, they cover labour conditions. So looking after basic labour conditions across your supply chain, quality, the quality of your product. They cover procurement practices, they cover health and safety, they cover environmental aspects, including carbon neutrality, that sort of thing. Sustainability in this context encompasses environmental outcomes, carbon outcomes, and your labour conditions across your supply chain. Is at the absolute heart of what we're looking at in terms of sustainable transport, long-term decisions for New Zealand. So the view that there's an absolute trade-off between economic outcomes and these sustainability outcomes in that broad context. If COVID-19 has not shown us anything, it's that you cannot trade these two things off, that you have to achieve both. We not only need to achieve long-term economically effective assets, we also need to achieve assets that are sustainable, of good quality, do that with the right way through supply chains being sustainable, and actually achieve environmental outcomes. And that's exactly what we're working on Waka, Kotahi, and have been for the last couple of years, embedding those principles deeply within our practices.
And Nicole, have your experiences during lockdown changed the way you think what's important?
Well, not really, actually. They've actually just reinforced what I already thought was important. I've always been a huge advocate for saying that economic factors cannot be considered independently from health, wellbeing, and sustainability factors, and sustainability in the broad context, including environment, quality outcomes, procurement. I've always said these things are not trade-offs. They have to be integrated into an intrinsically linked. I think at level 4, we were down to 70% drop in the utilisation of the transport network, or at least roads, at the peak of lockdown. What we've seen is essentially behaviour has returned to almost pre-COVID levels in terms of use of personal vehicles, and the public transport continued to operate throughout that period, just with reduced capacity and utilisation. So what I would say is COVID-19 has driven a focus on communities and building much better connections at a local level. So walking, cycling within a diameter of your personal home has become much, much more important to people, and people have seen the benefits of using walking and cycling as opposed to their vehicles. So that's great. It's new, and it sort of encourages things like innovating streets and us investing more money into walking and cycling. At the same time, over the short to medium term, and certainly over the long term, there's still a huge demand for public transport, for roads, and for rail that we'll need to continue to meet as well. So I think COVID-19 has given us an end. It has certainly said that we need to be multimodal, that we need to produce connections that allow people to operate in multiple ways, but we will still need networks that can be used for freight, roads, rail, cycling, walking, and it's really the integration of those things that's the opportunity out of COVID-19.
How important do you think it is that we have really good collaboration between private and public sectors when we are making these big decisions about where to invest in infrastructure?
Actually, Waka Kotahi is only as successful as the partnerships and collaborations we have, and they work both across public and private partnerships. So I think we can say categorically that we will not be successful in New Zealand unless we collaboratively work closely together between public and private. And we have been doing that for a number of years in this space. I would say that COVID-19 has just highlighted in spades that we need to do that even more broadly in New Zealand in terms of the decisions that we make. Because actually what we're dealing with COVID-19 is a complex problem. It's one of the most complex, if not the most complex problems, certainly in our lifetime, and all series of problems. And we all know that complex problems cannot be solved by any party acting alone. And in this context, we need all the skills we can bring to the table, public, private, NGO, young and, I guess old in terms of solving some of these problems because actually they're complex, which means by definition we don't have a known solution to many of these issues. I think in the forward infrastructure space, of course, we do know what types of solutions work, and I think we just need to continue to work on pulling those together into a comprehensive picture.
So those more large-scale construction projects that you're talking about, are they all sort of back underway now? Are you finding that you're able to back operating at sort of 100%?
The challenge of COVID is we've lost a lot of our summer season, so some of those projects are pushing out quite a fair way, just as a result of losing the time that normally a lot of earthworks and other things are done on those large infrastructure projects. But in general, the large infrastructure projects that were underway, that were being built, I think Transmission Gully, Puhoi, there's a number of those types of projects. We are just looking at getting those projects finished. In our broader pipeline, of course, we're looking at that through a COVID-19 lens, and we're asking the question of the future priorities. What are those priorities should we be bringing forward? You talked about walking and cycling, and we've certainly looked at doing some of that, which is our Innovating Streets program is another example of that. But in general, those projects have been based on projections that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years out of what will be happening in those communities and what the demands on the network will be. So when you think about it, a short-term hit on the environment through COVID-19 hasn't really substantially changed the future picture of population growth in New Zealand. There will be some unknowns related to immigration and those types of factors. But the forward projections we use allow us to build some of those things and consider those things.
If you could set a new course for New Zealand's future, what would your priorities be?
Think nationally, think long term, but act in real time and locally. So I think we're operating in infrastructure where we're looking at the future of New Zealand. We're making decisions now for 40 or 50 years' time, really. So I think the opportunity of COVID is to start actually being very ambitious about what we look like in 40 to 50 years' time. To be ambitious, you need to actually do things differently and you need to change the way you do things. And I think that's the opportunity of COVID. And I think we do a lot of short-term thinking. In the construction sector, it's all about margin. It's all about immediate profit. That's actually how the world is operated. It has driven us to massive environmental impacts globally, and actually it's unsustainable. So, we do need to do things differently. We do need to think differently. New Zealand is uniquely placed to do that. We're small, we're nimble, we're agile. We've shown that through COVID-19. We need to act now, or we won't make the change that we want for our kids, our families, and the future of New Zealand.
Nicole, if you could ask for one thing to be changed, what would it be?
We need to act when we know that there's problems that need to be addressed. That's what we need to change. And I'll give you that as a reflection. About 15 years ago, I was at the Harvard School of Public Health, and in the epidemiology class, they were talking about pandemics. And in that class, they talked about the fact that in the next 15 to 20 years in the world, there would be another pandemic that would affect millions and millions of people, and it would have disastrous economic consequences. Talked about the fact that it had been known for a long time, well understood across the international environment, this would occur because it had happened every 100 years in history. And it always affected a significant number of people throughout history. We all needed to be prepared for that because it would have not only huge health impacts, but it would have massive economic impacts. Now, if that is not the best example of us all failing to observe and act on something that had been that well known for a long, long period of time, I don't know what is. COVID-19 is our practice run for environmental change in the world, which will happen on a scale that is many, many times over what we have seen in COVID-19 if we don't take action on that issue of sustainability and acting differently in terms of the future. So if there's one thing that I would change, we've got to stop talking about it. We've got to start actually changing the way we do things. We've got to be ambitious, and we've got to really think with these big assets, 50-year timeframes, of doing things completely differently.